You are listening to the Fantasy IPA podcast.
Can't wait. It's time to go eat, baby. Let's eat.
Your audio hangout for the latest intel, projections, and analytics.
Hey, we are playing to win. I'm in a league of my own. They ain't ready for me.
Visit us at fantasyipa.com and follow us on Twitter at fantasy_IPA.
Let's do this.
And welcome to the midway point of the fantasy season. We're here with another Fantasy IPA podcast. I'm Mark Richardson. I'll be your host once again, and I'm joined by Jamie Black. Jamie, how are things going?
Going well, having fun halfway through the fantasy season, so looking forward to the second half.
We definitely like to sprinkle in some of the headlines in the sports world, not just fantasy. So I'm sure you caught the game last night. Were you happy with the outcome?
Oh, absolutely. Longtime baseball fan, and love the Cubs. And 1908, they broke that 108 game drought, so to speak, that curse. And I think that's probably the biggest game played since the 2004 Boston Red Sox won the World Series, breaking the curse of the Bambino. So very exciting.
Yeah, what a great game. And a lot of people are referring to it as one of the greatest games of all time. I would have to agree. Now, I would submit, and before I get into it, congratulations to all those long-suffering Cubs fans. So, and then Cleveland, you guys came close. You got your NBA championship. So, and you got close with baseball. I think that series could have gone either way. Anyways, congratulations to the Cubs. Now, how I'm going to tie that into football, Jamie, is the Cowboys have not won in over 10 years. I would submit that every year is kind of like dog years for the Cowboys that they don't win the Super Bowl. So it is the equivalent of over 100 years without a championship, in my opinion. And so all we need them to do is close it out and win the Super Bowl this year, and it'll be a really good sports championship year. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Growing up here in Dallas, we're used to winning, and at least our generation, when we were young and saw the 90s teams that just didn't lose, and it seemed like we should have won 5-6 Super Bowls, but yeah, we're on a drought right now, and it hurts every year. So I'm looking forward to this year, though.
Yeah, so Jerry and Jason, I know you're listening. I know you're regular subscribers. Go out there and win it for us. All right, enough about general sports talk, Jamie. It is mid-year, and we decided to run a mid-season mock draft over the first 2 rounds. We are doing this mock draft, and we basically just rotated picks throughout. So what this mock draft entails is really a reflection of how we would like to build our team. We're going to take a look at that. We're going to talk about some changes from preseason. And, we're doing it in the sense that there are going to be some takeaways that you can have going forward for the second half of the season as far as targeting players. And then there are like a random few leagues out there that actually start mid-season, and there are even leagues out there that redraft at mid-season. So I know it's a small population, but we're trying to put some content out to possibly help those types of leagues. And secondly, I think it's just a fun exercise. So we're going to get into that. Before we do, just want to remind you to follow Jamie at FIPA_Black. Follow the site at fantasy_IPA. All right, let's do it. And I had the pleasure of making the first pick, and I took David Johnson. Big surprise there. Won't spend too much time on him. He is the highest scoring point per game player outside the quarterback position. Scored no less than 10 points in any game. And as if it matters, he has the second easiest strength of schedule for fantasy running backs for the remainder of the season. So really no reason not to take David Johnson overall. He's matchup proof. He is game script proof. I took him number 1. Who would you have taken number 1, Jamie?
The same, David Johnson. And just, I'm not sure if you mentioned this at the beginning or not, but just so for those listening, this was done per standard format, non-PPR rules. So I can understand some of those PPR guys out there screaming Julio Jones and Antonio Brown. But no, in standard formats, I think David Johnson's hands down the number one player in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would even submit that I would take him number one overall in PPR. One thing I wanted to touch on, Jamie, is I alluded to that second easiest strength of schedule. This is a little bit away from the mock draft exercise, but it's kind of that time in the season where we're coming out of the heavy bye weeks, and it's time to kind of shift your roster dynamic. So if you have David Johnson, or even if you don't, people like Andre Ellington might be good players to pick up, in the sense that if Johnson goes down, he could be a game winner. And so when we're talking about roster dynamics and, stashing wide receiver fours, running back fours, it's time to kind of streamline and hedge your bets, and then stash some of those players that could be game winners down the stretch. The only other thing I'd like to say before we move forward is that midseason mocks in general, you're going to take into account bye weeks. I think for this particular exercise, we're not taking into account players that have 7 versus 8 games left that haven't had their bye. So I just wanted to throw that out there, in the sense that we didn't necessarily factor that in. If you are drafting in that type of league, that may, interchange a couple of these players. So David Johnson goes number one. No big surprise there. Jamie, you had the second pick. Who did you go with?
I took Zeke. Ezekiel Elliott right now is, he had a rough start to the season. Not rough, but just a slow start to the season those first 2 weeks. He couldn't seem to get going, and I think we saw it was more impatience than anything else. He was running through the line almost. We've seen a complete turnaround, and right now he has the second most points per game for non-quarterbacks since week 2, and then he's third on the year. And I alluded to that slow start being, he would probably be second on the year if it wasn't for that slow start. And then, he's also leading the league in rushing right now. He's averaging since week 3, which is when we really saw him. He went on that tear with 140 rushing yards per game for 4 games in a row or so. And since week 3, he's averaging 5.6 yards per carry, which is phenomenal. And he's leading the NFL with 162 total yards per game. And I think he's hands down number 2 right now, behind David Johnson. And I really don't think the opponent matters. He's matchup proof. We saw it in Green Bay when they had the number 1 rush defense in the NFL, and he just completely gashed them a couple weeks ago. And also Zeke, he scored 16 or more fantasy points 4 times over his last 5 games, with the exception being in week 8, this last game where he scored 14.8. He had 148 yards. He just didn't get in the end zone that game. And something I do want to point out is he hasn't scored a touchdown since week 5, but that's really just an anomaly. I see touchdowns coming. I see plenty of touchdowns coming for Zeke, and he also has one of the easiest remaining strength of schedules for running backs. So as you alluded to with David Johnson and Ellington, I think Morris would be a great guy to pick up and handcuff right here, because he could do some damage if something did happen to Zeke. Yeah, that strength of schedule is just icing on the cake here, though. So I don't really think it has a whole lot to do with how Zeke is going to perform for the rest of the year.
And Zeke did have a 60-some-odd yard run. I think it was 68-yarder called back, so that could have made up for the touchdown he didn't score, but it didn't. Jamie, I'm going to be referring back to preseason average draft position. It is a combination of a snapshot of ADP as we headed into the season from 4 different sites, being ESPN, CBS, Yahoo, and NFL.com. The average draft position across those sites was 7 for Zeke. He moves up to number 2. I don't think it's any kind of stretch here. I think 7 this year probably might be the last time you'd be able to get him that low, but I definitely endorse Zeke at number 2. At number 3, I went with Le'Veon Bell. Now, I think you could actually make the case for Le'Veon as the number 1 overall pick. He scored no less than 12.8 points in the 4 games he's played, and that's without scoring a touchdown. That's going to change moving forward. Now, the Steelers have about middle of the pack strengths of schedule for fantasy running backs. And you could surmise that there might be a slight dip in numbers if Ben misses time. Looks like he's going to play this week. But even a slight dip for Le'Veon keeps him probably in the top 6 or 7 running backs. And when Pittsburgh is hitting on all cylinders, I would also say that there's probably nobody else that has the ceiling as Le'Veon Bell. Much like Johnson, he is involved in the pass game, so he is pretty independent of game strip. In the preseason was going 12. That's a little bit of an outlier since he did have that 3-game suspension, but I was very confident to grab him up here at number 3. Any comments on Le'Veon Bell?
I agree. I think Bell's up there with Johnson and Zeke, and Bell's more proven than Elliott. I think Zeke and David Johnson and Bell, that those 3 guys are going to lead the way. I think they're kind of in a tier of their own almost right now. So
who'd you go with at number 4?
DeMarco Murray. Right now, Murray is the second highest scoring in points per game player on the year, non-quarterback. He has the second most rushing yards in the NFL. He's very involved in the game, rushing and receiving. And, he scored 12 and a half or more fantasy points per game in every single game this year, which is, very impressive. And I really don't see that changing a whole lot either. So, while he doesn't have the upside of those first 3 guys we just talked about, he doesn't have that, quite that ceiling that those guys do. He is extremely consistent. And so I do think he's definitely number 4 guy here. And, he's averaging 17.7 points per game. I think we'll continue to see that 15 to 18 points most weeks. One could argue he belongs up in that tier, but, as I just mentioned, he just doesn't quite have that ceiling that those guys do. So, if there are any, knocks on him at all, it would simply be that Derrick Henry is waiting in the wings, and I think Henry is completely capable of running that offense. It's obvious that they have committed to Murray, and they're gonna continue to feed him the ball. But if they start put together a string of wins and start pushing for a playoff run, Murray could lose touches to keep him fresh. But you can't count on those things whenever you're drafting for fantasy. So, to me, Murray's number 4.
Yeah, I like Murray there. And Murray was going at 51 on average in the preseason. All right, Jamie, at number 5, I'm going to go ahead and grab Julio Jones. Julio Jones is right there with Mike Evans around points per game. He's actually the number 2 right now behind Mike Evans. It was 0.2 before Thursday night, points per game behind Mike Evans before Thursday night, and it's gotten a little bit bigger as of now. But Julio Jones still the most explosive receiver in the game, in my opinion. He's also in a robust offense that doesn't look to be slowing down. Matt Ryan is playing like an MVP candidate. Best football of his career. One knock against Julio is that he has had a couple subpar weeks, 3 to be exact, at 2.9, and 1.6. He also tends to get a little banged up from time to time, but I'll still go ahead and grab Julio Jones at number 5. He also has the 3rd easiest remaining strength of schedule for fantasy receivers. Any thoughts on Julio Jones?
No, great pick. I think he's a game winner, so can't go wrong with him.
All right, that brings us to pick number 6, Jamie. Who'd you go with?
Well, and then after Julio Jones goes off the board, of course, the last few years, these 2 guys are widely considered the 1A, 1B receivers in the NFL. And I grabbed Antonio Brown. So I went ahead and grabbed him after Julio, and also after those first 4 running backs we spoke about. In my opinion, there's a drop there. So I think it was a great time to grab Brown. He's had somewhat of an up and down season thus far, playing that Mud Bowl game in week 2 against Cincinnati. And then he had a down week, week 6, I believe, when Big Ben had one of the worst days of his career in Miami. And he played week 7 with backup Landry Jones, and I think he fared okay in that game. But still, Brown is currently ranked number 4 receiver in points per game, and I don't think anyone would argue that he and Jones, are cream of the crop, so to speak, when it comes to the receivers right now. Especially over the last 2 years. Jones had 1,600 yards and 13 touchdowns in 2014, and 1,800 yards and 10 touchdowns last year. So, Big Ben's expected back this week. I fully expect Brown and that Pitt offense to get back on track. Not that it really matters, but Antonio Brown also has one of the easiest remaining strength of schedules for receivers of the second half of the season.
Yeah, Antonio Brown, man. Julio Jones, I called him the most explosive receiver. Antonio Brown is just a technician, the most technically sound receiver in the game, and he just knows nuance, and he's got the quickness to go along with that. So Antonio Brown, who was going number 1 in the preseason ADP, you got him at 6, which is a bargain. I think at this point, I'd have been happy with any of these top 6 guys, but Antonio Brown, great pick there. I'll move to pick 7, and I went ahead and grabbed AJ Green, and I had him in my top 10, but you had him as a top 5 option preseason, and he has delivered as such. He's been a little bit up and down, but, as mentioned, that's kind of a norm for a wide receiver in fantasy. Still as talented as any wide receiver in the league. I think he's got a good combination of technical plus, athletic ability. So Julio, the explosive, Antonio, the technician, AJ Green is just a great combination of it all. You could take a little bit of a dip with Eifert getting healthy. His strength of schedule for wide receivers is about the middle of the pack. So I do think Julio, Antonio, and a couple other guys may have a little more upside, but I think Julio is safe, and he gives you one of the highest floors, and his production has been just so steady over the years. That's why I took him with that high floor, and he's got the possibility for multiple blow-up weeks regardless of matchup.
Now, I agree with you 100%. Like you said, I had him as a top 5 option in the preseason. I really like him, and if we're ignoring fantasy for a second and just looking at pure talent, and for whatever reason, a lot of people don't seem to understand this, but he might be the most talented receiver in the NFL. And if he's not, he's up there, up there with those other 2 or 3 guys. But it's just the team he plays on, and the quarterback, the running game. He doesn't have those big fantasy games like some of these other guys, but absolute stud, AJ Green. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the different attributes, I think AJ Green does bring that all-around talent. So you had pick number 8, Jamie, and you went with LaShawn McCoy. Let's talk about him.
I did, and I love McCoy when healthy and playing well. Right now, he's got the 5th most points per game among non-quarterbacks, and averaging over 6 yards per carry. This is over his last 5 games. He might miss one more game, but what I read today, it sounds like he's going to play this week. So I don't know. But he has that dinged hammy, so maybe he missed last week. We'll see if he plays this week or not. But last season he went on a tear kind of to end the year. He had 100 total yards in 8 of his last 9 games. And Buffalo had the number 1 rushing offense in the NFL last year. Right now, Buffalo has the number 2 rushing offense in the NFL. They're a very good running team, and as long as McCoy is healthy and that hamstring is fine, I think he's going to put up big numbers. He scored 13 or more points in every game but 1 this season. And once Buffalo got rolling in week 3, McCoy went on a 4-game stretch there before injuring his hammy, where he averaged 22.1 fantasy points per game. I fully expect him to pick up where he left off when he's healthy. And the difference this year is he is scoring those touchdowns. Last year he didn't. It seemed like Carlos Williams stole those touchdowns from him, but this year McCoy's getting those touchdowns. I know Gillisley has been playing well, and he might take some away, but it just seems like when McCoy's in there, he's always getting yards, and he's always putting himself in a position to score, and that running game, I don't really see them slowing down too much. And then one final thing to mention, Buffalo does have the third easiest remaining strength of schedule versus the run on the season, so that's a good thing too.
Yeah, you mentioned that McCoy is a little banged up, so watch out for him this week. Check to see if he's going to be in lineups. But you talked about that running game that's hitting on all cylinders, and on the other side of that is a passing game that's been largely kind of ineffective with really no pure studs in the passing game. So why not lean heavily on McCoy? And he could still produce as a running back one, even if Gillislee gets a little bit more work. So LaShawn McCoy, Shady McCoy, you take him at 8. He was going number 26 in preseason ADP. All right, I'll move to 9. And by the way, we did this mock draft on Tuesday. So just 3 days later, you might be able to make the case that the guy took at number 9, Mike Evans, could have been the first receiver off the board going as high as the 4th pick. So I got Mike Evans at number 9. In the preseason ADP, he was going at 24. Coming into the week, Mike Evans actually was edging out Julio Jones on a per game basis. Now, part of that is because he leads the league in targets, and that did not slow down Thursday where he got 17 targets. But add in that he has the easiest strength of schedule for fantasy wide receivers. You have a recipe for a league-winning player in the second half. And, I wouldn't necessarily put him at the elite skill level as those others, but he's getting there. And the fact that he's getting such a big target share just makes him so dangerous. Speaking of that game last night, I'm going to digress a little bit and just comment on what a show the two receivers, Jones and Mike Evans. And if you didn't see all the touchdown passes that they caught, they were just things of beauty. Mike Evans ended up putting up 11 for 150 and 2 touchdowns. Julio Jones, who had a spinning tippy-toe end zone catch, ended up with 8 for 111 and a touchdown. They really did put on a clinic out there. Anyways, as mentioned, Evans went 24 preseason ADP. Stoked to get him at 9. Any thoughts on Mike Evans?
Now that I like everything you said, and you did say maybe not quite as skilled as those elite level receivers yet, and that's probably true, but in fantasy that really doesn't matter. So fantasy wise, I think Evans has just as much upside as those guys. Julio and Brown and Odell Beckham Jr. They're the guys until they're not. But there's Hopkins and Evans and Cooper. There's these other guys that are right there, and they're going to get up there. They'll be up there with them sooner than later.
All right, Jamie, who did you grab at number 10?
At number 10, I grabbed Devontae Freeman. He actually had a slow start to the year, but he is top 10, and he's averaging 5 yards a carry since week 2. The Atlanta running game is phenomenal right now, as well as their offense overall. They just look unstoppable completely. The only thing keeping Freeman out of, he wouldn't finish the way he did last year, where he just blew everyone away. But the only thing keeping him out of that top 4 or 5 area with those other guys is Tevin Coleman, who is currently injured, by the way. But even before the injury, Freeman was coming on. He's clearly the better runner, the between the tackles guy, and he is the goal line beneficiary guy. He gets the red zone and goal line carries. And since week 3, he's averaging the 6th most points per game among all non-quarterbacks. And again, like I said a second ago, I don't think he'll crack the top 4. He's definitely a guy that has a chance just to finish outside of the top 5 range at running back on the year, and in standard formats. That's right there with the top couple of receivers as well.
Yeah, Devonta Freeman, preseason ADP had him going at 16. That is for the RB1 coming out of 2015. And while I think a lot of the community got it right in thinking that Tevin Coleman was going to eat into his workload, what we didn't count on was the Atlanta offense just being so explosive and efficient. And the fact that that this offense can actually support two running backs with one of them in top 6 to 7 range is a little bit of a surprise, but that's what we've got here. And you took him at 10 with a preseason ADP of 16. Looks like he was a bargain coming into the season. All right, let's move into pick 11, where once again, pretty happy to grab an elite player at his position, and I went ahead and took Gronk. Since week 5, Gronk has scored a ridiculous 22, 23, 23, and 22 points. So I think the first 2 weeks he was still kind of ramping up, but now that he's full speed, he's just putting up sick points. The tight ends are in. Jamie, we've talked about kind of the mishmash and the dart throws that you're doing every week. Having Gronk and being able to plug in and have that positional advantage every week is wonderful. And when I say positional advantage, I'd probably say you would have it over 10 out of the other 12 owners, and that the Reed owner is probably right there with you, and Olsen might be just a skosh below, but having an advantage over 9 other owners is just, it's really nice going into a week and feeling like you've got that position locked up. Now, I don't expect him to score 22 points per game moving forward, but, I wouldn't be shocked if he does that in at least half of his games with Brady, angry Brady playing the way he does. And, as mentioned, when he does score 22 in, the tight end position where, 8 or 9 points is a top 12 scoring week for a tight end in non-PPR, Gronk is just such a great asset to have there. Any thoughts on the Gronk?
No, I agree with you 100%. A difference maker at the position, and you have such an advantage on everyone else, other than maybe the Reed owners who are right there. And then, there's not many teams where the tight end is on a strong passing team and is the number one target. So, Gronk has everything going for him. Can't go wrong with him.
All right, Jamie. And at pick 12, you took Odell Beckham.
Yeah, Beckham, he had a slow start to the year as well, but, last year he was 8th at receiver at this point in the season before going on a tear, and he ended up actually finishing 2nd in points per game at wide receiver in standard formats. I don't really see any reason for much to change, especially considering he's done most of his damage in the second half of the season. Every year he's been in the league, which hasn't been too long. His first year in the league, we remember those first few games. You can't really count those because he didn't get a whole lot of action, but over his last 8 games in 2014, he had 1,043 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. And over his last 8 last year in 2015, he had 926 receiving yards and again, 9 touchdowns. So, in his career thus far, he's averaged a little over 19 points per game in the second half of the season in standard formats. And it also seems like Manning starts the year slow and generally gets going in the middle of the year. So I fully expect Beckham to play like Odell Beckham in the second half of this season.
Yeah, I do too. And, of all the players that are kind of low now, I would put money on Odell Beckham jumping back into that elite tier. So getting him at 12 when he was the number 2 player going off the board in ADP preseason could be a great value if you're getting him here in the midseason. So love Odell, love his upside. And we'll see if he can continue his second half improvements that he's shown over his first couple years in the league. You're on the swing, Jamie. So who did you take at pick 13 or the first pick in round 2?
On the turn at 13, I took Melvin Gordon. Right now, he's 4th among all non-quarterbacks at point per game. Despite the low yards per carry, he's averaging about 100 total yards per game, and he's already scored 10 touchdowns on the season, which is phenomenal. With the exception of that Week 6 matchup against Denver, where he scored 9.4 points, Gordon has scored 12.7 or more every game this season, and he scored around 18 or more in 4 of those games. He's also improved his yards per carry over the last couple of games, and even though he's he's shaky in that regard. He's had 4 games where he's been over 4 or more yards per carry. So I think things are turning around for Gordon. I think the light bulb's coming on for him a little bit. And then most importantly, you have to look at opportunity in the NFL. That's the biggest thing. And that backfield's his right now. There's nobody else to contend with. So he's getting the targets, the receiving yards, the rushing yards, and the goal line carries, all the red zone carries. So, I'm not sure he's going to score 20 touchdowns this year, but I do think he keeps scoring. And he has one of the easiest remaining strength of schedule for running backs this year. So, I don't see much changing here. I like him at 13.
Yeah, Melvin Gordon at 13. He was going at 70 in the preseason, so quite a big mover here. Obviously helped by the fact that Woodhead went down, who, by the way, was actually scoring about 14 points per game before he went out very early in the season. But that actually has helped Gordon take over that backfield, and he's getting a lot, if not all of what would have gone to Woodhead. So Gordon at 13 going 70 in the preseason. There are definitely some external factors going into that. But at 14, Jamie, I went ahead and grabbed Lamar Miller. Now, Miller is a little bit banged up right now, but he's run well in recent weeks. He does have 2 dud weeks at 2.4 and 6.7, but otherwise offers, I'd say, one of the highest floors at the running back position. That's my justification for taking him here in the early second. He's also only scored twice, but I would expect him to finish with, 6 to 10 total touchdowns. But then again, Brock Osweiler. But he does have a favorable strength of schedule overall, which once again I think is going to lead to an uptick in touchdowns over the remainder of the season. So any additional comments to add on Lamar Miller at 14, who was going number 11 in the preseason?
No, and I'm one of those guys that think that Houston is they are going to get it together a little bit, and so I know many would argue that Osweiler's done, he's washed out, that they're not going to be able to throw the ball, they're going to focus on Miller, but I don't necessarily agree with that, and we've seen what Miller can do when he gets going, so I'm on board with what you said. I think that he has a better second half, and I really do like his floor. That they're committed to getting him the ball, so I don't see that changing at all.
All right, then at number 15, who did you go with, Jamie?
I took Des Bryant, and right now Des is finally healthy, and surprisingly, a great surprise for us Cowboys fans is that Dak Prescott is playing phenomenal quarterback right now. So Dez is going to be heavily involved, and he should be one of the best second half receivers in the NFL this season, especially in standard formats where touchdowns count for so much. And he's always a guy that's commanded the ball, and I think that was evidenced by his 14 targets this week in his first game back against a pretty tough Philly defense, and he had 113 yards receiving and a touchdown. Because of the running game, they're not going to be able to just lock in on Dez. Cowboy running game is running well, and also Cole Beasley has emerged as kind of a lowercase Julian Edelman, Wes Welker type guy, but that he's one of the better slot receivers, one of the best slot receivers in the NFL right now, and you can't just ignore him either. I like what Dez is doing. Dez had a terrible first week. I'm not sure what the numbers were, but he really didn't do anything. I believe he caught 1 pass, and then he was injured. And since then, he's played 3 games. But in those 3 games, he is third among receivers in points per game in those 3 games that he's returned. So I'm looking forward to a big half for Des Bryant. and not just him, Dak Prescott, the entire Cowboys offense.
Yeah, Des Bryant, on average was going at 13. You took him at 15. And I think kind of a hidden knock that or a hidden advantage that I actually put as a knock against him in the preseason is that if Dak goes down and Tony Romo comes in, and we won't get into whether they're going to start Romo or Dak, either way, Des Bryant is insulated. So I think that if Romo gets in, he actually has a little bit of an uptick as far as a ceiling. But and if either one of those quarterbacks get hurt, he's insulated against that. So I like Des here. Yeah, I took Amari Cooper at 16. Cooper is in a second tier cluster of wide receivers, and they're scoring right around 12 points per game. And right now that puts him at wide receiver 6 on the year on a points per game basis. He has had a couple of duds, but that is the story of wide receiver this year, probably any year, where there's no receiver that hasn't had 2 to 3 dud games. Derek Carr is playing lights out, and Crabtree on the other side is actually one of the other receivers in that tier that is scoring right around 12 points per game. So defenses are having to choose between the two, and Carr's making them pay for that. Referring back to the dud games, Cooper's season in general, there have been multiple games where Cooper's still developing, and he's left a lot of points on the field, whether it be due to drops or stepping out of bounds to nullify a 60-yard touchdown. But I expect him to shore up some of those issues. He does have the second hardest schedule for fantasy receivers, but I really don't see this offense slowing down anytime soon, except maybe this week against the Broncos. But luckily, they don't see Denver again until week 17, so hopefully you've already won your championship at that point. Anything to add on Amari Cooper, Jamie?
No, I do like Cooper. I actually think that there's the upside there. He's one of the other players other than Mike Evans, one of these other young players that just has a ton of upside. These two guys could be, Evans and Cooper could be the next Julio Jones and Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham Jr. type guys. So nothing else to add, though. I think it was a great pick.
And Cooper was going 28th in the preseason. I took him here at 16. That brings us to pick 17, Jamie. Who did you go with here?
Okay, yeah, I took T.Y. Hilton at 17. Right now he has the 6th most points per game among wide receivers. He's number 5 on the year in standard formats. And he's basically, you were talking about Amari Cooper. They're almost exactly the same amount of points right now. They're fractions off. So right now, I think T.Y. Hilton, he offers a solid floor considering, he's 4th most targets in the league, and I believe he's had double-digit targets every week except for 2. And anytime you have luck at quarterback, that's probably going to give you a pretty solid floor. And I spoke about T.Y. Hilton in my targets and shots piece back in August, and just want to read something that I wrote. I'll quote it right here. I think it's relevant. I said, Hilton finished as the number 12 overall receiver in 2014 despite missing 2 games. He averaged slightly more points per games than Emmanuel Sanders, who finished 7th at receiver that year. Hilton was on pace for 94 catches, 1,537 yards, 8 touchdowns in 2014, which would have been good enough to finish number 6 at receiver that year. Slightly edging out Odell Beckham Jr. It's not fair to Odell Beckham, who didn't play a full slate of games that year, but still, I think that just goes to show, how quality of receiver he is, even at his size, what he can do. And I think this is the first time really since then that both he and Luck are healthy and on the same page. Not that they were ever not on the same page, but they're both healthy, back in sync. And even with the return of Moncrief from injury now, I fully expect them to stay that way. I see Hilton being in that group of receivers that you were talking about earlier, averaging about 12 points a game, finishing somewhere in the 6 to 10 range at receiver this year. So Hilton was my pick at 17. Art.
All right, yeah, T.Y. Hilton, you took at 17. He was going 30 season this week at least. Make sure you're checking on his availability. But yeah, so Jamie, at 18 I took Spencer Ware. Maybe a little bit of a reach here, but with Jamal Charles going on IR, I went ahead and grabbed him. The offense overall has struggled a little bit, but I think Ware's involvement in the passing game gives him a very high floor, and I think he's going to increase that touchdown total in the second half. Keep an eye on him. It looks like he might miss this week due to concussion. He didn't practice today, so he's doubtful for Sunday. But if healthy moving forward, any game that Spencer Ware is playing in, I can't see him being ranked out of the top 12 running backs in an Andy Reid offense that is notorious for productive fantasy backs. Anything to add there on Spencer Ware, Jamie?
No, I'm out. Actually, he surprised me this year due to his receiving ability. So I'm very impressed. And now that Charles is on the IR, as you said, I think it's a great pick, especially getting him at 18.
Yeah, and he gets the award for biggest mover in that preseason ADP had him going at a whopping 139th, and taking him at 18 gives him a big jump of 121 draft slot. So I grabbed Spencer Ware here. Jamie, you had pick 19. Who did you go with?
I took Brandon Cooks here. Right now, Cooks is fifth at points per game among wide receivers, and he actually has some great matchups remaining, including Tampa Bay in weeks 14 and 16, which are playoff weeks in most leagues. So, I except for those a few slow weeks, which were 3 and 4, I believe, Cooks has scored roughly 14 points per game or more in all the other games, and there's 2 games where he went over 30. We've seen it this year. He has the ability to explode. He's very dynamic, one of the most dynamic players in the NFL, and he's a playmaker. He's a guy that can win you weeks sometimes. Cooks will have those down weeks, just like all receivers. But I think that one thing about Cooks you can count on is when he's playing at home, you can fire him up and count on him being probably a top 10 receiver that week or most weeks at home. So I do think that's somewhat of an advantage, being able to predict or hedge against those down weeks. I expect him to finish somewhere, in between the 6 and 10 range at receiver this year. And again, the playoff matchup, I like it. So grabbing him here at 19. I actually considered the guy you took at 20, but I was content grabbing Cooks here at 19.
Yeah, and Cooks was going on average in the preseason at pick number 30, so a pretty good jump there for him. You talked about the guy who took it 20, and I went ahead and grabbed Jay Ajayi. Once again, I think this is a bit of a gamble, but hearing that you considered him makes me feel a little bit better. But, that gamble is based on the small sample size we have, and it is based on 2 great weeks from Ajayi. But, at this point, there are issues with most of the players left anyways. He's obviously not going to rush for 200 yards every week, but his offensive line is healthy. And I would even submit that they are up there, if not equal, maybe just a skosh below that Cowboys offensive line. He's got Adam Gase calling plays. So I think that Ajayi moving forward is going to be a mid to high end running back 1 from week to week. And on top of that, there really is no threat to his workload. So I see him giving you that high floor. It goes without say that he can blow up on any given week. There may be a couple safer options at this point, but I think he could offer some of the highest upside. So I took Ajayi, and I'll hope for the best. Jamie, any more comments on Jay Ajayi?
No, I agree with you there. I like him, and you did say there was some risk, and of course there is. But for those who don't remember, coming out of college before that whole lack of cartilage in his knee thing. He was widely considered the number 2 running back that year behind Todd Gurley. So, I think Ajayi gets rolling, and I see a solid season for him.
Yeah, Ajayi, Gurley, and Melvin Gordon, the top 3 backs coming out before that news of his knee. But Jamie, you had the 21st pick. You took DeAndre Hopkins. Why did you take him?
And again, I'm going to allude back to what I said earlier a little bit with Miller. I may be crazy here, but I am a believer that Houston can turn this offense around. I think that Bill O'Brien, he has a complicated offense. There's a lot of option plays for receivers where when they come to the line, in a typical play call, receiver goes to the line, he knows what route he's going to run. Well, most of O'Brien's play calls, the receivers have option routes. So, they call the play, and the receiver and the quarterback have to be on the same page, without, hand signals, just by looking at the defense. So, I think it's a little off. And the offense, it's one it's a little tougher to learn. And I just want to point something out. Think back to last year when Matt Ryan was struggling with Shanahan's offense, and they had to scale it down for him a little bit because, again, a complicated offense that took a little time to learn. But Osweiler is not Matt Ryan by no means. But just look at the difference in Matt Ryan from last year to this year. And I know it's still this year, but they have their bye coming up, and they also have the easiest schedule remaining versus the pass overall. So I do think that Hopkins can benefit. I think that Osweiler, if he calms down, and I think maybe if they scale back the playbook a little bit, maybe take some of those option routes away. Hopkins is one of the most talented receivers in the NFL. So, if you just give him a chance to catch the ball, he's going to catch it a lot of times. So if they do that, and I don't see why they wouldn't, I think Hopkins can rebound, and we all know that his skill set and how talented he is. So, this late at the 21st pick, why not take a chance on a guy who was considered up there in that tier with Jones, Brown, and Beckham at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, I like Hopkins here too. I don't like Osweiler. I think this is one where you and I are on different sides of the fence. I think, and it actually, I think, calls out one of the differences between us, Jamie, where you're a lot more patient, whereas I'm always ready to pull the plug and move on. We talked about Golden Tate earlier in the year. So, maybe if we can find a middle ground, a hybrid Jamie Art would be perfect. But yeah, with Brock, yeah, I understand he's trying to learn the offense, but this is a guy, and he's only been in it for half a year, but he was in Denver for, a couple of years where when Manning returned, they still went to Manning late in the season. So I'm not sure I'm buying into the learning curve there, especially when you're dealing with like mental capacity and you're talking about people like Carson Wentz who gets it right off the bat, whether it's the reads or, understanding it's a little bit more of a complicated offense over there. But, I'm just not buying into Brock. But with that being said, I don't think bad enough that it's going to drag DeAndre Hopkins out of the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 conversation. So speaking of Hopkins, he was going at the number 8 pick. You took him at 21. So a little bit of a drop there. We expected some regression, not this much. We'll see if they can turn it around in the second half. At number 22, I took the other Raiders receiver, Michael Crabtree. And right now, we talked about that second tier at 12 points per game. Crabtree is in that tier, surprisingly. And he's only had one bad week against Kansas City, where I think he saw a lot of Marcus Peters over there, but has surprisingly had one of the highest floors of any receiver, scoring 9 points in one game and no less than 10 points in any of the others. I do think people are slow to trust Crabtree based on the fact that if you took him when he came out, there were high expectations and he didn't necessarily deliver on it. But I do think he's finally in an offense that accentuates his skills in timing and in hands. He's a great fit. Carr is playing lights out. The offense continues to flourish from week to week. So although it felt odd taking Crabtree here in the second round, I went ahead and grabbed him. Anything to add on Michael Crabtree, Jamie?
No, not really. I would say I agree mostly with what you said. I do. I think he has a rock solid floor. The only thing I'm not crazy about is the ceiling there. I don't think he has a high ceiling with the other weapons in that offense with Cooper. Cooper's the one with the high ceiling, and then in the running game. But, we're talking about the 22nd pick here, and we're this deep into wide receivers. So, when you're looking at a low end wide receiver 1 or a, top wide receiver 2, I do think Crabtree's the guy you want. He's a prototypical, fits that mold.
Yeah, he did go 87 in preseason ADP. I took him at 22. Now, referring to a ceiling, I think it might be a little bit higher in that he might be the preferred red zone threat. Well, I guess not named Seth Roberts, but, I like Michael Crabtree here with that floor and the touchdown upside. So, Jamie, you had the number 23 pick. Who did you go with?
I took Jordan Reed. Jordan Reed, coming off a concussion last week, had a solid game. I forget the numbers now. I'm not looking at them, but I believe he had 9 catches for about 99 yards. He finished the 2015 season as he's the number 2 tight end in standard formats, averaging about 1 less point per game than Gronk. I think they both scored the same amount of touchdowns, and Reed averaged about 10 less yards per game. I do think that the injury history here is it's a bit disconcerting, and it does give me a little scare. But whenever Reed is healthy and on the field, he's up there. He and Gronk are up there in a tier of their own, and what he's missed this year, I think he'll make up for it. I think he'll come back and continue to be up there. I believe he and Gronk both have 3 touchdowns on the air. Gronk's averaging about 11 more receiving yards per game than Reed right now. They both missed a couple of games actually because of injury, and I believe Gronk is averaging exactly a half a more point per game than Reed right now. So I think that just kind of speaks to the fact that Reed is, he's not Gronk. Gronk is hands down the number 1 tight end in the NFL, and I don't think there's any disputing that. But I do think that Reed is right behind him there, number 2. And I think that he's if Gronk is in a tier by himself, then Reed is kind of in a second tier by himself. And both of these guys are the best. I love grabbing Reed this late. It gives you an advantage, just like you were saying earlier with Gronk. It gives you an advantage at the position because there's a drop off. After this, there are a couple other tight ends, Greg Olsen and Tyler Eifert, who are playing well, and they do play well. And Eifert scores touchdowns, which in standard formats will give him points. He seems to be hurt quite a bit too, and he's not the number 1 passing option in his offense, and or Reed and Gronk are in there. So I view Jordan Reed similar to the way you viewed Gronk, and just grabbed him here, giving me an advantage at this position over pretty much everyone else out there except for the Gronk owners.
Yeah. Yeah, you took him at 23, Jamie. In the preseason ADP, he was going at 34. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this draft out at pick 24 and take Todd Gurley. Preseason, he was going on average as the pick 3. So, I'm going to refer to that in just a second. But aside from a 4-point outing in week 1, Gurley's actually offered a relatively high floor. Now, we won't get into the psychology of fantasy, but it seems a lot worse because the high pick investment that you made. But he remains a rare workhorse that he's had no less than 18 touches in any game. Case Keenum's playing a little bit better, and the wide receivers as a whole have stepped it up. So I see Gurley with his touches keeping the high floor, and his ultra talent could see him having a couple monster games despite his situation. Speaking of situations, there's the Jared Goff watch. So it could actually get worse for Gurley, but I would also submit that it may get better in the sense that we've seen rookies come in and produce this year, whether it be Cody Kessler in Cleveland has come in and he hasn't necessarily terribly hampered that offense. You've got Dak Prescott, Carson Wentz. And then there's also the fact that no one's seen Goff yet, and it generally takes the NFL, 3 to 4 weeks to catch up and get enough film on somebody. So I would surmise that Goff's insertion could actually help Gurley a little bit, despite popular opinion that it would really tank his fantasy value. So I will take Gurley to close out the second round. Any thoughts on Todd Gurley, Jamie?
I mean, he's a stud. So, I mean, you can't fault anywhere in the second round grabbing Todd Gurley. You just kind of have a feeling that he could break out and go on a tear any minute now. So I agree. I agree with you there. Strong pick.
All right, Jamie. So that does it for the 2-round mock that we ran, and we're going to stop real quickly. And I was going to ask you if you can give me about 1 or 2 players that you're considering that you could definitely justify in these first 2 rounds.
It's always nice to be able to grab a quarterback. You don't want to grab them early, and in most drafts like that, I would not do that. But someone like Brady Breeze or Matt Ryan. Honestly, right now, the way the running back situation is looking in Green Bay, Rodgers as well. I could see myself grabbing, one of those quarterbacks at the end of the second round. Marvin Jones, he's a lightning rod, and I think he's the best receiver in Detroit right now, and we've seen what he can do, and I'm not sure what's going on right now and why he's not being productive. But I wouldn't take him over any of the guys that we took, but he is definitely someone that is tempting and was tempting. And then one more player I want to mention, and this is again, this is kind of like the Jay Ajayi, if you want to call it a reach, but is Jordan Howard. And the way he cut through Minnesota's defense on Monday night, and some of the games that he's had, I know he's had a couple of down games after he started on a tear, but I mean, this guy's the real deal, man. And the total 200 yards against a Minnesota defense that has absolutely shut everyone down. Man, that's just impressive.
Yeah, I didn't consider Jordan Howard, but I love hearing it. As you know, I'm one of his biggest fans, but I'll throw out a couple names like a Devonta Booker who, with that situation in Denver we talked about him producing as a running back 1 for the rest of the season. I may have taken him if we did this last week before the shoulder injury and what looked to be kind of a subpar game for him. But Devonta Booker, Jordy Nelson, who if Rodgers wasn't spreading it around so well, I think he'd be a lock in here. Since Jordy's been a little bit up and down, I think he fell out. And then lastly, I think Brandon Marshall, he's still getting the targets. I think he's going to have a good second half of the season. So I really did start considering him in the middle of the second round. But he didn't quite make it into this mock draft. Yeah, so some other players that didn't make it, and some of them were gone due to injury, Jamie, is Adrian Peterson, who was going 6th in the preseason, Eddie Lacy going 19th, Doug Martin going 22nd. Now he could come back and have a great second half. But Jamal Charles at 23, and then Keenan Allen, who just missed the top 24 preseason at 25. But had he been healthy, I probably think he probably would have ended up in this mock draft. There's a couple of guys who are healthy that didn't make it in Allen Robinson, who was going 15th overall. Jordy Nelson and Brandon Marshall, we talked about. They were going 17th and 18th overall. Mark Ingram at 20. And then 2 quarterbacks. Now, we didn't take any quarterbacks, but Aaron Rodgers and Cam Newton were in the conversation as far as ADP at 21 and 14 for Cam. They also didn't make it. Couple more observations before we close it up, Jamie. It really didn't change much in the sense that the preseason ADP did have 11 running backs. Our mock draft also had 11 running backs. The slight shift came in the quarterback position, maybe more of a reflection on our strategies, but the 2 quarterbacks mentioned, we had 0 quarterbacks go in our mock draft, and we had 11 wide receivers to 10 in the preseason, and Jordan Reed snuck in as a second tight end in our mock draft that we just ran. 4 players were drafted outside of the top 50 that made it into our mock draft, in Michael Crabtree, Spencer Ware, Jay Ajayi, and Melvin Gordon. So, Jamie, anything to add around the mock draft or anything else before we close out?
No, it is interesting to see how when you get halfway through the season how things change. It does every year in fantasy football, and I think one of the biggest takeaways, and you mentioned it, we both mentioned it, even though there were 11 running backs taken both times, I think there's kind of a reemergence of the running backs right now. We see. We see a good half dozen running backs that are up there and can hold their own with those top tier receivers, where last year you were only looking at 1 or 2, maybe 3 guys, and then we also see other guys like Isaiah Crowell, who actually he's I believe he's top 15 overall right now. And he's in a poor offense, which is probably why I'm not sure he will finish that high, but just guys like that. Interesting to see how next year will look whenever we come to draft. A lot of people had the 0 running back theory this year. I see running backs kind of not all of them, but I do see some running backs kind of reemerging into the game, and that it's just going to be interesting to see, I think.
Yeah, so I definitely agree. I think there's a running back renaissance, and the odd thing about it is that if everyone is doing the same strategy, you're actually going to fall into success, and that if everyone was doing late running back, you did stumble upon the Isaiah Crowells, the Spencer Ware, and so while it may have worked for you, it may not have been because of the sound strategy behind it, but I digress. But yeah, as mentioned, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you for listening as usual. Please remember to subscribe and rate on iTunes. Remember to follow Jamie at FIPA_Black and follow the site at fantasy_IPA. That's going to do it for this time. So until next time, make sure you get you some IPA.
Adios. Wow, I just choked on a peanut.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy IPA podcast. Visit us at fantasyipa.com and follow us on Twitter at fantasy_IPA.
Hail to the king, baby.
To the house, baby.
Please subscribe and review at iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast provider.
Call truck. That's called truck.
See you next time, and until then, make sure you get you some IPA.
Come get some.
Get some. Get some. Get some.
We just want to say thank you for all the love.
And we're out.